Good morning, good afternoon, and where you are. Thank you for joining us today for the Introduction to the Activate Fellowship webinar. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but if you please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat.
Good job.
And again, as people are filtering in, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Introduction to the Activate webinar. To the Activate Fellowship webinar. We'll get started in just a few moments, but if you please let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. Let's see, I see we got some people up here. We have Washington, D.C. I'm in Alabama. I'll go ahead and put that out there. We have Tulsa, Oklahoma, Boston, Mexico. Love to see the reach. Love to see the reach. Ann Arbor, San Diego, San Francisco, New Mexico, Orange County, a good bit of California people. Welcome, welcome. And a good bit of Michigan. Always love to see Colorado coming through. And to finish us up, I'll go on ahead and get started with a little bit of an introduction and just a couple of considerations before we jump in, into the content. But again, good morning and thank you for joining us. I am Kerrigan, but we'll do an introduction just a little bit later. Wanted to give you guys a heads up that we are recording this meeting. It is for internal and external purposes. We are going to post this webinar on our website, on our series of YouTube videos that we have available throughout the year. If you feel uncomfortable during the Q&A portion of this session, please feel free to keep yourself off camera if you would like, but you're also more than welcome to put any questions that you may have in the chat at any time, and we'll go through those as well. Zoom doesn't like your camera for some reason. No worries, George. While we would love to see your face, we do have your picture right there, so that is all good to go. You don't have to come off camera, but if you want it to come off mute to answer a question during the Q&A portion, we'll give you instructions on how to do that later. But let's get started. So I wanted to introduce, first of all, the Activate recruitment team. You're going to be seeing a lot of us as you attend events this recruitment cycle and throughout the year. First, we have Rick Kempinski on the call with me. He is the Director of Fellowship Recruitment, and me again. I'm Kerrigan Turner, and I'm the Outreach Associate here. But today, we're going to talk about what we're all here for, the Activate Fellowship. We're going to go into a little bit about us, talk about a little bit about the history and the fellowship itself, and then we'll follow up with what you can be doing to prepare your for your application as we gear up towards applications opening in the fall. So a little bit about us. Our mission is to empower scientists and engineers to reinvent the world by bringing their research to market. We're a 2-year fellowship for science entrepreneurs that seeds new ventures into the early stage innovation ecosystem across the country. This is our community. We have 188 Activate Fellows that you can transform with, and we have 40 plus full-time staff here to support you on this journey. We like to call ourselves the premier program for scientists on a mission. We exist to support our fellows, full stop. Our job is to support you in your transformation from scientist to entrepreneur so that you can then ensure your innovation makes an impact. This picture is from our most recent retreat in June, and that includes staff, current, and alumni fellows. Building community is very, very important to us. And again, our purpose, we exist to support our fellows. We don't charge any equities or take any equity or charge any fees to participate in the fellowship. We exist to support fellows who make things, So transforming our physical infrastructure of the world and improving society and really bridging this overall mission for science for good. And finally, we support our fellows who make things for a purpose. For humanity to thrive in the face of global challenges, we need to reinvent our economy to be equitable, sustainable, and resilient. So a little bit more about the fellowship. The Activate Fellowship is your path to market. We'll embed you in a community with the expert managing directors, the Activate team, the alumni and fellow community, and a network of ecosystem champions who are available to assist you at any step. You get money to iterate. Activate fellows receive a yearly living stipend of $100,000. That includes travel, health insurance, and relocation. You also receive $100,000 for R&D, and you have the ability to get additional flexible capital through our venture partner program as well. You develop skills in the fellowship. So we have an entrepreneurial tailored curriculum, personalized mentorship, and immersive workshops that provide comprehensive support for those transitioning into a founder's mindset, fostering that individual growth as well as that professional development. But truly, this is really all on a path to lead you and your technology to market. We embed you in a whole self-development environment where you have the freedom to not only develop yourself, but also your technology with access and support from champions who want to see you succeed. All Activate Fellows share a common purpose: to improve the world through science. But just as there are no single solutions to global crises, there's no single persona, path, or story behind who an Activate Fellow is. In fact, the more backgrounds and perspectives represented in our fellow community, particularly through individuals from historically marginalized and underrepresented communities, the richer the fellowship experience will be for all fellows. In our strategic plan as an organization, we articulated as one of our 5 key strategic objectives the goal of becoming a leading nonprofit or non-governmental organization in advancing DEI within the science and technical innovation. These are just a couple of our commitments that we currently have to inclusion, accessibility, and diversity throughout our fellowship and our organization. Science can change everything. Our fellows work across 16 verticals aligned with our broader mission to address climate change and other global challenges. We accept groundbreaking technologies that will innovate industries across many sectors, from climate to electricity, biotechnology, food and agriculture, space, and many others. We have this is our full vertical list, but we also have this available on our website if you needed to check it out, or even the companies within these verticals that we have that have been Activate Fellows currently and in the past. Activate started in Berkeley in 2015, but we have since grown into the Northeast and most recently the South with the addition of Activate Houston. These 4 in-residence communities allow fellows to immerse themselves in founder-forward cities with strong ecosystems and resources to thrive. For those who want to make an impact in their local communities, we've introduced Activate Anywhere in 2021, allowing for a virtual experience from the comforts of their home with quarterly in-person visits to encourage community bonding. Each community has a team that you'll work with closely to utilize the many benefits of the Activate Fellowship. Our 5 managing directors shown here are truly the foundation of our communities. Being former science entrepreneurs themselves, they are your main champions, providing that personalized mentorship as well as the brain trust to support you. This team also consists of a fellowship manager and associate as well who are available to help you, and a partnerships team to assist you in making introductions and continuing to broaden our ecosystem of supporters. So that's all about the background of the Activate Fellowship. So let's talk about the history. We were founded in 2015. We created a pathway for scientists whose research was too applied for basic science, but also too early for industry, and they were often left at an impasse. With no career path that really satisfied them. So our fellowship was an intentional path that enables scientists as well as engineers to transform their idea into a product that addresses those real and profound societal needs. After we went through Berkeley for a couple of years, we then expanded into Boston in 2019 and proved that the fellowship can work in another ecosystem. Since then, with the addition of our New York as well as the now Houston community, we really wanted to create this in residence community, but then introduce our virtual community as well with Anywhere. But with our fellowship model proven to be successful as well as scalable over the years, we're currently focusing on providing more impact in hubs across the country and developing new ways to support our fellows and budding founders nationwide. But enough of me talking about the history. We have a special guest here today. We're going to chat with one of Activate's co-founders to really get an inside story on the history of Activate and where we're going. Matt Price is not only a co-founder of Activate, but is also our current president and chief financial officer. He has deep experience in business development and venture investing in clean energy technologies, including expertise in renewable energy, material science, R&D, and venture capital. He was previously the managing director of Cyclotron Road, which you'll hear more about in just a moment, the VP of channel development at Enlighten, and a principal at Nth Power, among other roles at clean energy startups. He's a graduate of the Kauffman Fellowship and holds an MBA at the Haas Business School of Business at UC Berkeley, and has a BS in materials science and engineering from Northwestern University. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to bring up Rick as well as Matt to do a little bit of a fireside chat. We're going to take some time to really hear about the story of Activate.
Great, thanks again. And Matt, thank you for spending some time with us today to talk to this group about the origin story of Activate, which I love origin stories, so I'm excited to hear it from you. I don't think I've had an opportunity to actually chat with you about this yet, so hopefully my questions will not only enlighten us, but also enlighten the audience. So thanks again for your time.
Yeah, so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And so we're by this lovely fake fireside here, so we're gonna have a little bit of fireside chat. So I guess let's just start from the beginning. Let's talk about, how you got involved and where the idea of Activate started, and how you all got it off the ground.
Yeah. So, I mean, the original brainchild for Activate, which really operated under this nomenclature of Cyclotron Road, was born by Alon Gur, who was a friend, and he was getting his PhD in material science at Berkeley when I was there getting my graduate degree. And the real origin story for him was he was at ARPA-E, so the Department of Energy's agency for funding advanced technology research. And as he was finishing up his 3-year term there in the 2013 timeframe, the pain point that he saw is that there was a lot of really exciting and promising technology being funded by ARPA-E in their 36-month, 3-year program that was going to sit on the shelves because at that time frame, venture capital had really withdrawn from wanting to support very early stage scientific breakthroughs like what ARPA-E was supporting. And so Alon set out to go figure out either a venture fund or a program that made sure that these promising technologies that were being supported at ARPA-E would continue to move forward. And so for him, he really defined it as like a month 37 problem. And actually the original name of Cyclotron Road and the first applicants to the program in 2015 applied to something called M37, which stood for month 37. Before we got to that time frame, though, Alon really started to realize that there was what's really a month 0 problem. And what the month 0 problem was phenomenal talent that was coming either out of academia or industry that had kind of participated in kind of early gestation periods of kind of like Gen 1 clean technologies, whether it was in biofuels or batteries or solar, that wanted to do it again, that wanted to take what they had learned in a scientific setting and apply it towards commercialization. And because venture capital had withdrawn and because large corporations were largely focused on technologies that were 1 to 3 years away, there was just no pathway, for people who wanted to work on these really high risk technologies. And so, not given another opportunity, they were looking at jobs in banking or jobs in consulting or jobs at software companies or tech companies, or starting companies that were more tied to like business model innovation or financial innovation. And the implications for that from a society standpoint is awful, right? Because we don't live in a sustainable world right now. We need better solutions across the board in so many different facets of how we think about food and health and water and shelter and safety and communications, that if those who are trained to manipulate these building blocks of our physical and biological world aren't given a pathway to translate those things into commercial utility, then they just sit as IP or publications and don't actually drive towards the society that we're looking for. So a lot of what we actually asked in the initial application, and we still ask this in our current application, is if not for Activate, like what is your pathway? Unfortunately, a lot has changed in the last 10 years so that there are other good programs, there are other good funding agencies and mechanisms whereby, you can get SBIR or STTR grants, you can get some kind of initial money to move these things forward, but largely it's just not enough. And we don't have a lot of time to solve a lot of the problems that we're looking for. So that was the original origin, was how do we keep people who want to transform society from a scientific, background, how do we keep them in the game? And the original recipe is they need to have some funding, they need to have access to lab space, and most importantly, they need to have an incentive whereby they're in control of their destiny in terms of how they move those technologies forward. And so Alon had approached Paul Alvisados, who is the director of Berkeley Lab at the time. Dr. Alvisados was Alon's PhD advisor when Alon was getting his PhD. And Alon and Berkeley Lab were the first ones who said, I don't know if this idea is going to work, but I'll commit kind of initial money and try to work with the leadership at the lab to see if you can get anybody to apply. If there's some good scientists who want to work in an entrepreneurial oriented way and want to do so at Berkeley Lab, sure, we'll host them for 2 years. But I don't think anybody's going to apply. And if they do apply, I think my basic Office of Science Funded Research Lab is going to be too much of a cultural disconnect from the entrepreneurial environment of the scientists that you're going to support. So it's probably not going to work, but let's give it a try and see what happens. And so like amazing vision by Alon, amazing like foresight and support from Berkeley Lab and Paul Alvisados and others there to support those first 8 fellows. About 3 months later, it became clear, there was a lot of appetite. So I think 150 people applied within 2 weeks of standing up a website. Berkeley Lab had money to support maybe 6 fellows. The Department of Energy was invited to listen in on the initial presentations. And they were able to find some loose change in their budgets because there was 8 great fellows to support. And that was the launch of Cohort 1 in 2015. And the last big risk point that I think Alon had identified early on is, well, if there is demand from scientists to work in this way and they can work well in the Berkeley Lab environment, how do we extend this beyond just Berkeley? Because at some point, if we're going to really talk about societal problems and global problems, we can't be expecting the scientific community just to move to Berkeley and move to the Bay Area. And so there's a big question as to how do you create an organization that's independent of the national labs, independent of the government agencies, to be able to make this work, make it work really well, do the things that governments and national labs can't do very well as it relates to commercialization, finance, et cetera, and bring it into a much larger scale. And so I had spent time as a venture capitalist, a business development person, and a fuel cell engineer. And so I saw all these problems and I saw the different pieces that Alon and the founders had put together in this initial concept, and thought that this could be really significant in terms of accelerating how quickly these technologies can move forward. And so I got brought in to figure out, what is this independent organization? Do we create a big venture fund? Do we create a nonprofit? Do we create an innovation consulting organization? We had no idea what it was that we were going to create. And I spent about 9 months thinking through, again, if this is a month 0 problem, and it's about keeping scientists in the game working on things that are too risky for private capital, that largely led me down a background of starting a nonprofit. And that's how Activate got off the ground as a nonprofit organization.
That's great. And you kind of were alluding this onto the pathway of how it was created, but can you talk about how you then created this mission, the whole empower scientists to reinvent the world and, developing the global challenges in companies around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it goes towards what Kerrigan did a great job of teeing it up, in that we don't have a sustainable society, like how we generate electricity, how we move around, how we eat food, how we consume water. Like, it's just not good enough. Like, we just consume too many planets worth of resources. So I think this audience probably largely understands that and gets that. But there's a couple of other elements that are really key to Activate's mission that don't get captured just in that part of it. There's a whole host of elements that are broken as it relates to the way we operate around, in our society. So, like, how we sense what's happening in the world around us, how we communicate, how we compute. There's things that are maybe tangential to energy and climate, but they are separate. And having an organization that develops the skill sets to support scientists across a really broad spectrum of technologies was something that we thought was missing from kind of a market failure standpoint. I think the other market failure that we were seeing comes back to the venture capital hat that I had, and that Alon had been involved in a few different venture capital backed companies. Venture capital is a very important financing mechanism towards startups. But there's other ways of financing the commercialization of technology. And whether that's through licensing, whether that's creating other nonprofit organizations. And so while venture capital is important, it's just a sliver of how we should be financing these things. So we wanted to set up an organization that has the mission to support scientists more broadly across a spectrum of technologies, and wanted to have an organization that could support scientists across kind of many different avenues of how they want to finance commercialization beyond just starting a company. So I think, like, one of the kind of misnomers early on at Activate and Cyclotron Road, and that is important for me to try to change the narrative on, is Activate isn't for those who want to start companies. Like, starting a company is a mechanism of pursuing commercial translation, but it's just a mechanism. It's not the only one. And so what Activate is really about is we really are about supporting scientists who want to commercialize technology. And if it's through an independent startup, great. We know how to do that really well. If it's through proving it out and getting it licensed or acquired by a larger organization, great. We've done that a few times. If it's pursuing a nonprofit and open sourcing this, I haven't seen fellows to go through that process yet. But as an organization, we would love to see that and would want to support it. So that was really the full, I think, kind of like genesis of the mission of broadly, how do we empower scientists to do commercialization, not how do we help, scientists start, venture-backed companies.
Great. And can you talk a little bit more? You talked a little bit about it, but more about the barriers you faced initially setting up the organization. And how did you get around them? How did you get around them successfully?
I mean, it goes to those initial, there's three main risk points that Alon and Paul identify, which is like, this is crazy. You're going to take people who are really smart, who've spent the last like 3 to 10 years of their life, like working in these technologies all over the world. And you're going to say, come to Berkeley, use an Office of Science research lab. We can only fund your salary and maybe the salary of a second person, maybe for 2 years. We can only give you about $100,000 to spend on technology development. And that all has to happen in lab procurement. Like, nobody's going to apply. If they apply, there's a cultural disconnect. And even if you can get past those 2 hurdles, you're just building a bridge to nowhere, because the technologies that people are working on, it's probably true with this audience of people who are interested in Activate, like, it takes more than $100,000 to move any of these technologies forward in any really commercially oriented way. And so if you don't have venture capital or you don't have larger corporations writing checks, then, like, great, you're buying people 2 more years of like pain and misery. Like, what's the point? And I think that this is where, being an entrepreneur myself and Alon being an entrepreneur, like, we don't know, but we just know we have a problem and we need to give it a try. And we need to have some kind of like blind faith and naivety that this will work. And I think that was part of it. And I think at the end of the day, what ended up being successful was if you take really smart people who get to control their own destiny and you really kind of get out of their way and don't put constraints about what they can and can't do as it relates to how they finance it or what applications that they're working on, then like magic happens. And I think that that's been the result of the last 10 years is there's very little fallout of companies that have been launched through this type of mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of answered my next question, which was what were you surprised were the most successful things? But I feel like you answered it if there's anything else you can think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think in getting into the details and with the scientific community that's on here, one of the reasons not only was there not a cultural disconnect between Berkeley Lab and the early Cyclotron Road Fellows, there's a really positive synergy. And I think where that positivity came from is when you I mean, the principal investigators at Berkeley Lab are world-class scientists. And they are pursuing things through the lens of basic science and basic discovery. To be able to have an Activate fellow in the lab with them with a similar level of technical training and similar intellectual like curiosity of those scientific questions of why, but doing it through the lens of like commercial risk mitigation, commercial technology development, just creates a pretty intellectually healthy and enjoyable communication and feedback cycle between both of those two parties. So like, yeah, sometimes we would see financial exchanges because Cyclotron Road Fellows would apply to government funding with the PIs from Berkeley Lab, but that's not really where the most significant value was. I think where those intellectual relationships really fed off of each other created a really healthy environment for both parties. And I don't think people would have been able to predict that that was going to happen.
Great. What were some of maybe your initial ideas that you all thought of that didn't work and that you had to sort of pivot on?
I mean, one of the challenges, I mean, it's so hard what Activate fellows do. Like just being commercially successful in any entrepreneurial endeavor is super hard, but if you apply a lens of like an advanced material or a new process, like the challenges just become so much harder. But then you lay it on like if that work is being done by like a solo founder or like just a team of one or two, like there's just so much, there's not enough time in the day to take care of all the different things that need to get done in order to retire risk, which at the end of the day is whether you raise venture capital, whether you take money from government agencies, whether you work with corporate partners, everything about commercialization is risk reduction. And if you only have like a team of one or two, there's just not enough time and energy to do the amount of risk reduction that's needed in the time frame that we need. So like, how do we solve that was one of the biggest hurdles. And I think it still is a hurdle. Like we still have a lot of Activate fellows who are solo founders, and we've tried different types of programs, funding mechanisms, vehicles, et cetera, to do matchmakers, to find co-founders, whether it was technology co-founders or business co-founders. We created a undergraduate fellowship program at one point that we're no longer doing because we found a lot of our fellows need to be in the lab developing the technology as well as out of the lab talking to commercial partners. And for a bunch of really unfortunate reasons, it's a whole lot cheaper to hire a postdoc to be in the lab than it is to hire an undergraduate technician. But the work that actually needs to get done is more in line with an undergraduate technician than a postdoc. And so figuring out and being really laser sharp about what work needs to get done and who's got the right incentives to do that work is still always, I think, a problem for entrepreneurs and just resource constrained companies. And so we, as Kerrigan teed up, the journey that any individual fellow goes through is going to be his or her own journey. And so it's really, we want to create as much scalable systems to solve common problems across the fellowship as much as possible. But the reason we set it up as a fellowship in a common nomenclature that we use is we support technologists, not technology, because every one of these is its own journey. And so how to deliver kind of the intimacy of the program and the intimacy of the community that we have and respond to like the unique challenges that each individual fellow has, but do so in a scalable way is still very much like an exercise and a balancing act that we're trying to pull off.
Great. Thanks. So as you're as we're thinking about the 10-year anniversary of Activate next year, what do you think are the biggest impacts the fellowship has had on the world so far?
I mean, in 2014, there was, in 2012, 2013, 2014, there was a general sentiment that venture capital doesn't fit, clean technology or scientific breakthroughs. Like, and you just won't see venture capital kind of investing in, a solo founder or a small team working in scientific breakthroughs. And like clearly that has changed really significantly. I mean, I think when I was in venture capital over the course of 10 years, we had $30 billion of paid in capital. We're kind of looking at that on a per year basis, these days. And so that's not because of Activate, but like Activate's been on the forefront of showing the world that there are really smart, really talented scientific entrepreneurs who can create really substantial value if you give them the right avenues to be successful. And so I think for me, that's one of the big successes is you're not hearing that anymore. That may change, we still need to show that we can create exits and liquidity for the investors who are investing. But I think more importantly, and going back to the mission of Activate, I think we also have to show that there are other mechanisms to commercial deployments. And so seeing more companies or more fellows who've been successful in working with corporations and leveraging their balance sheets and their teams to radically and massively deploy the technologies that are coming out of it, I think is one element. And then I think the other thing is, and we see this, we don't see it as much, but as I think as the founders of Activate originally thought, but we thought we would see more failures in the Activate program. And I think one of the questions that we often get asked is like, well, why don't you see more fellows walking away, from these innovations that they're working on? And for us, like we celebrate really strongly and really authentically if a fellow comes in and says, I had this intellectual itch, I had this idea, I just spent the last 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, we don't care what the time frame is, I tried it and it didn't work. I'm now like, I've scratched that intellectual itch, I'm going to go and do something else that's not tied to my technology or not tied to a startup. Like for that, we will celebrate that as much as we will celebrate somebody closing $100 million round. Because again, it all goes back to that month zero problem. We need more shots on goal. We need more entrepreneurial scientists trying this out. And if it works for a startup, great. If it doesn't work for a startup and somebody develops their leadership voice in some other way, great. We've got examples across the board of all different types of outcomes for the fellows. And before, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had a few examples of each of these. Now we've got, we're not at n equals 30 in each of these different outcomes, but we've got enough examples where it's not just random. So I think for me, like that's the success over the last 10 years is people are now seeing that there is a pathway for them to work on these commercial translations that they didn't see before.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask one last question, then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So if you're thinking about a question or if any of these are jogging some thoughts for you, please get ready to either ask it in the chat or ask it, raise your hand and I can call on you. You can go off mute and ask Matt directly. But Matt, I just want to know, like, as one of the founders of Activate, where would you like to see Activate and the fellows companies, in the next 10 years or another 10 years from now? What would you like to see if you had a magic wand?
I mean, if I could jump forward and be like, let me say 30 to 50 years. I don't know if my board would like this, but like 30 to 50 years, like Activate shouldn't exist, right? Like academia should figure out how to create the incentives and the mechanisms for scientific entrepreneurs to do these things in their like home proximity, right? And the educational curriculum that we put together at Activate and share with our fellows, like ideally we can get like enough time and energy to make that so robust that that curriculum is just out there and available, whether you're in academia, whether it's in industry, like really what Activate then provides is community. And so like maybe in like that 30 to 50 year time frame, you still need to have an organization that helps foster, you know, the important relationships that have a really wide spectrum of impact and kind of like value translation. So maybe Activate doesn't go away in 30 to 50 years, but I think like fundamentally the way in which we operate, we shouldn't have to operate. We're filling a market failure that is a market failure both in government and academia and industry. And if they can't solve it, then like we'll continue to be that like fourth institutional avenue to solve it. But like in all honesty, like if you need R&D space, our national labs, our academic settings have that. And the US government is doing a lot of creative things to try to get more like manufacturing or prototyping capabilities out there. So then it becomes education and information, and we've got really good educational systems to deploy it. So the last thing is a support system. So maybe we just become a support system. I think going to your question of like in the 10-year time frame, you know, I think we did really well in California. We wanted to expand a whole lot faster. I think one of the things that our board was really smart on was to say, don't expand, really get your operations, get your mission, get your culture established, and then start expanding. And so the success that we've had, you know, in the other markets in the US has been really rewarding to see us replicate it. But like how we operate, we have a one fellowship ethos, a one fellowship model. For me, success should be independent of whether you are based in the Bay Area versus Houston versus anywhere. I hope that same thing becomes true if and when we go global and go more international. So I'd say in the next 10 years, I think the thoughtfulness that we've tried to apply to how we do things in the US, we can look at how do we bring that to other parts of the world.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to do a plug for Activate Mexico City because I was there last year and I loved it. So we can talk about that later. Also, in 50 years, I'm hoping to be retired. So I can't wait to watch that journey and see of Activate and see if you were right. So
I think you'll find some support in Activate Mexico City.
awesome. Yeah, good. Well, I'll talk to other folks too. Well, Matt, thanks so much for answering my questions. I'm going to open it up to the audience. So I think we have a couple in the chat, but feel free to go off mute if people have specific questions, or raise your hand by clicking the reaction button and raising your hand, and I can call on you to go off mute and ask your question directly. But I think there's a question in here, Jefferson. It's up to you if you want to go off mute and ask it directly. But I think there's a question here about, you said, what's the sentiment or perspective around applied AI research and development of foundational models? Is research specifically around software-defined buildings technical enough or physical enough to be considered for Activate?
Yeah, I guess maybe I can
Yeah,
add context that generally, like on the first slide, it said that you guys prefer like atoms over bytes, essentially kind of like a preference for that. But in the built environment, one of the biggest things that you can do is actually build software for these bricks, right? And so there's an underlying sentiment that there's a lot of research that's still lacking to fundamentally allow any application to be deployed for climate change management, et cetera. So it's really like a unique niche that there is still an opportunity for research, and whether that's kind of like in the ethos or thesis of Activate to even consider pursuing something in that path.
Yeah, I'm happy to take first go. I mean, I think it's a great question. My short answer is yes. Like I think it is still, you know, you can still be innovating in something where like 99 or 99.99% of it is really on the bit side and not the atoms. I think for me, the way my brain organizes this question of, is this project right for Activate, largely comes down to like, how risky is it and how expensive is it to reduce that risk, right? And so like early Activate days, you know, our general view was if you were going to work on something that lowered the customer acquisition cost of solar, you could probably prototype that on, you know, $50,000 in 6 months of coding on your own, or like working with somebody, you know, to develop that. Whereas like if you look at, you know, Rainco, which is in our New York program that has developed kind of a new algorithm around Reynolds and turbulent flow, everything that Justin is doing is software based, but it's touching things that are extraordinarily complicated, require, unfortunately today, significant amount of compute. And ultimately to prove it out still very much has to work in like the physical environment. Terrafuse is another company that was like all software based around like weather modeling and advanced algorithms. We're certainly seeing a whole lot more around AI discovery of new materials and new processes. So it's not fair to say if you're just working in software, it's not a good fit for Activate. I think the lens that you would want to apply in an application is like, this is why, like, based upon what I'm doing, based upon what the world needs, this is really hard and expensive. And this isn't something that I can do on a 6-month and a $50,000 I-Core type of grant.
Thanks for that. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Matt. There's a question here from Urtai. I think it's asking about, oh, looks like Kerrigan already answered that one. What are characteristics of a successful application? That's a good one. Matt is also on our selection committees for probably the last 10 years as well. So I don't know if you have a lot of insight into what you all kind of look for on the selection committee. What would you, I know there's not one type of successful application. I think it really depends on the technology and what you're looking for that you're to invest in with our sponsors and things like that. But what do you look for in terms of just, you know, characteristics essentially?
Yeah, I mean, certainly as the broader we've gone in terms of the types of technologies we support, the harder it is to answer that question around like the one or two things. Certainly what I'd say is like, if you're dealing with anything that's tied to commodities, like techno-economics is a really important one. That's why you'll see a lot of videos, you'll see models from us. Like if the adoption of the technology is going to be based on some kind of financial review of the cost of generating that good or service, then you don't need to have the world's best techno-economic model in your application, but you do need to demonstrate that you understand why that's important. Because ultimately, a lot of the time in the fellowship is going to be based on tightening up the assumptions that go into validating what's in your TEA to justify why this is worth more time or more money, regardless of how you try to finance it. So if you're doing anything tied to commodity or like a financial oriented like consumer transaction, the TEA is a pretty good one. There's certainly a lot of things that we've innovated on where like, yes, there's some kind of cost comparison, but it's not really about a commodity. And therefore, the TEA probably covers 80 to 90% of most of Activate applicants, but it doesn't cover 100. I would say what may cover 100 is my experience through Activate and through venture capital and somewhat of a historian of science is that all of these things have been tried before in the past. I was a fuel cell engineer. That stuff went back to like the 1890s. And so a lot of what oftentimes that I was looking for as a venture capitalist, and I still look for this in the Activate applications, is like some kind of understanding or appreciation for how people have tried this before in the past and what is the breakthrough that now is enabling you to be successful. Sometimes it can be a technology breakthrough, sometimes it can be a regulatory change, sometimes it can be a market change, sometimes it can be all three of them. But I think having kind of some appreciation for other smart people have tried this before in the past. It probably hasn't worked, which is why you're seeing that opportunity. And it's probably not because they weren't smart. It's because something is new and different. And I think that that's something that we're trying to get out in the applications without getting into IP and secret sauce and, you know, any kind of like worry that you're giving away something that you shouldn't be giving from a technology standpoint.
Great, thanks. Now we've got some hands raised. So Chantel, why don't we go to you and then George and then Nick.
All right, thank you. Great information. I want to see if I will be a fit. I am an entrepreneur first who ventured out into research, and we're wanting to extend that further. So I'm not a scientist, right? Like your typical applicant. So I'm wondering to know if entrepreneur to scientist could be a fit for Activate Fellowship.
It's a great question. It may be a little hard to it's a little hard to answer. Let me just talk, and I saw a little bit of the questions around like the 4-year minimum, minimum requirement. Let me just talk a little bit about like the origins of where those things came from so that you can then like think about how to carry a response to those in the applications. Again, Activate's origins, and it's partially tied to the Activate's origin stories. We were taking outsiders, regardless of whether you call them scientists, engineers, entrepreneurial scientists, whatever you call them, I'm going to call them outsiders. And we're physically putting them in somebody else's lab. And that lab is tied to a nuclear facility, although a pretty, low, at least one where the type of work that's happening at Berkeley Lab isn't nearly as sensitive as like Sandia National Labs or Lawrence Livermore. And regardless of the nuclear side, you've got a bunch of gases, you've got a bunch of expensive tools and equipment. And so like safety is a really critical element in the culture that we have at Activate, as well as at Berkeley Lab, and pretty much of the host institutions that we work with. And so, so that's one avenue of consideration. The other avenue of consideration is a fair amount of the fellowships are being supported through government dollars. And so there is a fairness element that needs to be incorporated in a kind of effectively like an open solicitation or an open competition. So like one of the things Activate's needed to figure out is like, how do we define the boundaries that make it like fair and open for people to apply, keeping in mind some of the dynamics that we have of outsiders coming in and using other people's lab space, although not everybody pursues it that way. Where am I going with this? This is why I guess I'm just justifying why it's a really hard answer, to give. I think if you want to ask the question, if you want to answer the question, am I eligible? You can certainly you can look at do I have 4 years of post-baccalaureate, science background? And if you believe that you do, then you've got opportunities in your application to expand on that. And then the next thing to do, I think, is to say, hey, the big risks that this innovation is facing to go from where it's at today to commercial utility are these few things. And I'm the best person to reduce those risks. And if you're the best person to reduce those risks, then we would love to support you financially to help you go down that avenue. If you're not the best person to reduce those risks, and it's somebody else that's on your team or somebody else that you want to attract, then maybe I'm the best person to go find the people to reduce those risks. And that's one of the things that I want to use in the fellowship. It's not, like, in all honesty, that is a harder one for us to underwrite. We haven't underwritten that a lot, largely because we are still financially constrained in terms of the amount of fellows that we can support. But what we have seen is founders go out and understand, here's the risk that I need to reduce. I'm going to go find some world-class people to join my team, bring them on as a founder. You both apply as co-applicants. And if you are not, quote unquote, eligible, or you're not, quote, the right person to retire the risk that we perceive, but your co-founder is, you get that benefit of them being in the application. I hope, I don't know if that answers your question, Chantel. I hope it does. And there's also other ways of engaging on a more immediate basis too.
Yeah, and you answered it, Matt, the way we typically do in our webinars. And so if you have any follow-up questions, Chantel, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. George, why don't we go over to you?
Hello there. Good morning. This is a wonderful presentation, and this is my first bite into the fellowship. I was a bit disheartened when I first heard of it, and I looked at it and I realized that I'd missed all the windows for last year. So here we go. We'll start the beginning for this year here. I was very heartened when I heard that you work with the national laboratories. Out here in New Mexico, we're everything from Native American populations to places like White Sands. I'm within a stone's throw of Los Alamos National Laboratory. How do I set up a relationship with them should I become successful in the fellowship program? And if, having worked with the government before as a DoD contractor, these things can be extremely intricate and take a long time to do. Would I be able to have assistance from Activate to set up a program in an office in a cubby somewhere at Los Alamos?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say, so cyclotron road is one of the nodes in what the Department of Energy calls the Laboratory Embedded Entrepreneurship Program, or LEAP, LEEP. Los Alamos was involved a few years ago in looking at and potentially creating a LEAP node. Well, I know that they haven't publicly done that yet. I don't know if it's something that they're still working on or if it's something that's been mothballed. But I do know that prior to COVID, there was conversations about both what Los Alamos and Sandia can do to make it easier to respond to your type of request, George. I'd say my next answer is often, like, generally, if you were to apply next year, I would say apply into the Anywhere program. One of the questions is if you're going to be Anywhere program, what lab space do you need to begin retiring risk from a technology standpoint? And where are you in that process of being able to get access to those things? And sometimes the answers are, well, I really just need a basic fume hood or a basic like workbench to be able to do like 50% of this stuff. And if that's all that I can get, then that's where I'll start. But if I could get like a basic workbench and team up with the following scientists at Los Alamos, that would be my dream situation. And so like in the interviews, you would talk about, here's where I am in those conversations. Ultimately, if you can get to, some form of like verbal green light, there are different types of legal agreements that Activate and other national labs have started to create to make it easier to begin those types of collaborations. We talk about ourselves being an entrepreneurial fellowship program. For me, like this would be an example, like one of the questions that scientists usually need to answer in their application is like, okay, can you justify or can you prove that you are an entrepreneur, that you can operate in an undefined resource constrained environment? And so figuring out like how to create the access to the lab space that you need in a place like Los Alamos, whether that's independent of Activate or not, would be a pretty good proof point to your entrepreneurial capabilities.
Great.
But no,
Nick,
I don't have a magic wand to wave to Los Alamos and be like, hey, we've got this, amazing applicant, or this amazing fellow that we're bringing into the program. Let's pull this lever that now allows George to, come in and start using specific lab space there.
Thanks, Matt. Nick, why don't we go to you? Maytab, we're going to move to Kerrigan after Nick, because I already told him he can go. But then if we have enough time, we'll come back to you as well.
Thanks, Matt. Great program, great talk. Really resonated with the needs that you're discussing, especially around large corporations to cut checks for advanced R&D. We're developing a business based on selling perovskite products to solar cells. American Perovskite is the company, and we're supplying an industry that doesn't really exist yet, and many of our customers are VC backed, or so I guess I just want to hear a couple thoughts if you could share on we're out of Colorado School of Mines and working with NREL, and so it seems Activate could be a really good opportunity. But various risk mitigations we're going through, and I just want to get your couple thoughts maybe.
Nick,
Yeah, kind of just to be clear, kind of like developing products for like an industry that doesn't really exist, and they're typically like, I don't know, large the corporations or VC folks.
Yeah, I mean, I would say keeping that lens of we're trying to create a safe environment for people to address market failures. Like if a market doesn't exist today, then certainly venture capital is going to struggle to underwrite it. If you think that there's going to be a big commercial benefit, societal benefit, commercial benefit to this technology sometime in the future, and here are the things that here's the risk reductions that need to happen in order for that to become true. Like that would be, the standard story that you would try to get across into an application.
Yeah, and I've added our link to our tools for innovators. It's on our website. So if you want to look at that, it might give you some helpful resources and things to get you just thinking about how these, like, how to start setting things up and thinking about your business.
Minesh had this question about, is an employee of a revenue generating company, able to apply with a risky scientific project? I think the answer is potentially. The trigger words for us at Activate is an employee. We generally don't support employees, we support founders. And the reason for that is maybe more long-winded than what I have time for here. But, largely it's the amount of risk that we are trying to support is so large that it takes a lot of time and a lot of executive decision making to be successful in that journey. And if you are not kind of one of the main decision makers in answering the questions that need to be answered over those next 2 years, that just falls outside of how we've architected our program to support. So we have had people say, like, I'm an employee at this large, at this organization. I want to work on this scientific breakthrough, but they're not allocating budget, to me to work on this. Can I work on this project? And the answer would be like, yes, leave your company, quit, and apply to Activate. If you get in, quit your company and work on this full time would be our response, versus no, we wouldn't fund you as an employee of your organization to work on this type of scientific breakthrough, that is under the leadership and under the governance of somebody else that we don't have the opportunity to work with.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt, for your time. I know I want to turn over to Kerrigan just to get some information. I know there was even a question from Marta in the chat asking about deadlines. So I think Kerrigan's going to go over the timeline. But Matt, thank you for your time, for your insight, for your wisdom, and for your knowledge and all of your help getting Activate started and all the impact you and your teammates had and all of our colleagues have every day. So thanks again. And if you have any follow-up questions for Matt, feel free to email us at apply@activate.org, and we can always get him to reply.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Kerrigan. Thanks, everybody, for expressed interest in Activate. Please apply.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Alrighty, so I'm just going to share my screen very quickly again. We're going to go over some of the requirements for the fellowship and follow up with what you can do now. So continuing on, this is the fellowship application timeline. So fellowship applications are going to open this fall. We typically say around September, but of course we'll be releasing more information on that exact date as we get closer to it. Once applications close, during that November, December, winter area, we're going to go through our rigorous down select process in which we get to what we're coming up on in the next week, which is our finalist week in March. Once we do our full rigorous down select process, we get to our finalist week, which is a full week full of presentations from our Activate finalists in which they present or pitch themselves as well as their technology to our ecosystem, in which the selection committees, the full presentation audience will then be talking about giving them feedback, answering questions. From then, we'll do another down select in which our fellows are going to be selected in April. And the fellowship begins in June with our opening of our big retreat that we had, where you saw the picture from at the beginning of the presentation. For acceptance into the fellowship and to be eligible, there's just a couple of, here's our requirements, but I'm just going to point out a couple of ones that we've been talking about over the discussion, as well as just some extra ones. So you must have a bachelor's degree and that 4+ years of post-baccalaureate research or development experience. This includes those who are in industry and also and can even hold academic positions. It's where you get into, if you're awarded the fellowship, you must be committed full-time and that kind of discussion. But you can be entering out of your PhD, may also be in industry and wanting to come back and become an entrepreneur. You could also be in academia as well. You also must be a first-time founder and be expected to lead the development of your proposed project. So a little bit what Matt was touching on earlier with that decision-making power, it is necessary to forward your technology as the fellowship progresses. You must be committed to working on the on the project on the proposed project or company full time. So again, if you did have outside employment, you would have to end that to come in participate in the fellowship. But good thing about it, we do give you a living stipend and health insurance to alleviate some of the stress that comes with that. You must be legally able to work in the U.S. for the duration of the fellowship, but this also includes foreign nationals and those on visas. Now, I'll make a note, Activate cannot sponsor visas since fellows are not employees of Activate, so you must have a plan to hold a working visa for the duration of the fellowship, but we'll ask that information and get some more information from you in the application should you be a foreign national or in need of a pathway for your visa. And finally, you must be able to communicate proficiently in English. Your proposed project or company must be aligned essentially within one of our 16 verticals or in the physical, biological, or engineering space. It must be in development and not ready for full-scale product sales. And then finally, I'll note that you must not have raised more than $2 million in debt or equity funding from non-governmental sources at the time of applying. This does not include SBIR, STTR, or governmental grants to forward your technology in the meantime. We definitely encourage you to go out and get those grants in the meantime. It's more so the debt, equity, the fundraising seed funding that we are talking about with the $2 million. What can you do now? So again, I just told you that applications don't open for a couple of months. So I know you're probably thinking, what do you do now? You can sign up for our communications if you haven't already, so you can get more event announcements of different things that we'll be holding, different webinars almost monthly as we gear up for applications opening in the fall. And you can definitely do that at activate.org/apply. You can consult our fellowship page, which has a lot of information about the fellowship in general. We have community pages with more information about our 5 communities, as well as our FAQ page for more direct information on the fellowship and the different requirements and things of that nature. And then finally, you can check out our companies funded by fellows and alumni to really see if your technology might align somewhere. You can consider our 5 communities, your technical vision and pathway, and we also plug in the techno-economics section for you as well there if you want to go through that and start to think about that for your company in the meantime. Your co-applicants and advisors who will be on your team, how the fellowship will high level be beneficial to you and your project, again talking about that risk mitigation, but as well as the professional development that you'll gain in the fellowship. And finally, you can take advantage of our full programs and resources at activate.org/learn. And then finally, another plug for events. We'll be doing events as we gear for applications opening in the fall, but we'll really be deepening your knowledge on the Activate communities and the fellowship, teach you how to prepare a propelling application, and then answering all of your individualized questions. Finally, I'll make this last plug once again. For any additional questions that you might have after this call or just in general, you can always email us at apply@activate.org and we'll respond to you there. Otherwise, I thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time out of your day to spend it with us to learn more about the Activate Fellowship, and we'll see you soon.